Welcome to the Business of Being You podcast. My name is Marco Benitez, also known as Coach MarcoB. I'm a life and business coach specializing in authenticity. In version 2.0 of this podcast, we're going to be focusing on authenticity and the many different ways it shows up in different aspects of life. Today's conversation is just that. We're going to talk about conversations. I have with me Louis Melendez. Louis is a communication coach who helps people find the words to get what they want, whether it's a new job, promotion, or close a deal. After selling $5 million in digital ads at Yelp and raising over $4 million for nonprofits at Charity Buzz, Louis founded Have Better Conversations to teach others how to successfully negotiate and communicate in their professional and personal lives. Louis's approach includes sharing tools and strategies for developing confident, human, and outcome-driven conversations, skills, and habits. He's worked with big companies like Salesforce, ClassPass, Athena, and Yelp. Louis also provides one-on-one coaching to high-performing individuals, such as corporate executives, sales leaders, doctors, and lawyers, and has also trained TED Talk speakers. He's the co-founder of Workflow, a unique corporate team-building experience using music to build connection and community. And as the cherry on the sundae, the icing on the cake, he's also an improv and live comedy performer. So welcome, Louis. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Marco. Coach Marco B. I'm so happy to be here.
We've known each other for a little while now, maybe going on a year. We were in a mastermind group together. You always were a master at guiding us in our conversations, and you and I always had an ongoing thing with coming up with words that we seldom use in daily conversation. I think the first time that caught my eye was when you said ethos. I said, ethos, this is not something we use very often. So, and it just became like an ongoing thing, man. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. And I agree. You know, I love the power of words. And I love how much you can communicate with the right word choice. So that, of course, you know, it makes sense that we're both interested in vocabulary. And, you know, one of the interesting things about when you and I met about a year ago is our conversations from the very beginning have been very authentic.
Yep.
And it's a natural topic for today.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, what role have conversations held in your life, personally and professionally?
They play the central role. They are the center of my universe. I mean, my business is, as you mentioned in the intro, Have Better Conversations all day, every day. I help people find the words they need to get the job raised, to close a deal, to navigate an obstacle in their relationship, to be a more effective salesperson. They all come back to the same core foundational skills. You know, if I were to write a book about an autobiography, let's say, it might be called like The Gift of Gab, right? I've been running my yap since I was a kid, and I really enjoy connecting with people, making sure that they feel heard, and also advocating for myself. And I think that conversations have been the tool, the mechanism by which I have found greater professional success, personal success, whether that's been as a salesperson, as an account manager, as a personal assistant. I've held a number of different roles. Communicating effectively and clearly is at the center of all of it.
Right, right. Were you always good at conversations, or was there a time where you were timid? And, you know, I've never known that side of you. I've always seen you once you've been kind of in your zone.
You know,
was there ever a pre-conversation Louis?
Maybe when I was like really young, you know, I remember as a child being a bit precocious and a bit serious. But in fact, as I turned into a teenager, I sort of saw, hey, what are the stakes are so low? The stakes are so low so often. We can put ourselves out there. We can crack a joke and no one laughs. And that's okay, right? We can put our foot in our mouth and yeah, you know, there might be some consequences, but like the stakes are often so low in terms of volunteering one's authentic self,
right?
And just like being whoever you want to be, that I quickly found that voice and that piece of myself as like a teenager, I would say, and I haven't looked back. I started doing stand-up comedy and improv comedy when I was like 16. And that, I think, really opened the floodgates to putting myself out there, getting on stage, and being up in front of crowds.
Right, right, right. So the focus on the of my work that I do is authenticity, and I always try and relate it to the different aspects of life. And how important would you say that authenticity is in conversations?
It's interesting. I'd like to say that it's very important. It should be important,
Right,
right? When we want to really foster meaningful human connection, and we want to create or recreate that feeling of like, wow, that person really understood me, or wow, that person really sees the universe in the way that I see the universe, right? That feeling when we see ourselves in the words of someone else. I think that that really only happens when we're communicating authentically.
right, right,
And when we communicate with inauthenticity, when we're faking it,
right.
people can smell that. We can taste it. We can hear it. We know what that sounds like, and we're quick to dismiss it. People shut down, people dismiss inauthenticity. So, authenticity buys us real estate
Yeah,
in the mind's eye of the listener, right?
yeah,
It gets us in the door, and they say, you know what? Okay, let this person in. Let me hear what they have to say.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. It's funny because recently I've had to have conversations with car dealers. It, it's it,
Not
it
authentic.
it's so scripted. It puts me in a bad mood. It's always put me in a bad mood. Like I hate salespeople. Like I hate people being salesy. And you know, you already know that my background is in healthcare, and so when I used to work in the medical office, um, the pharmaceutical reps would come by, and sometimes they were very pitchy. They're very pitchy, and they try and it's just very clear that they have an agenda, which is their job. I get it. But there were some reps that would come by where they would be very effective at just keeping their product top of mind just because they were very natural and very
Mm.
comfortable. It didn't seem like they were scripted. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. People who approach conversations and pretty much anything in life with inauthenticity, you can spot it a mile away. So, what would you say is the anatomy of a good conversation or a conversation in general?
Mm. Immediately, what immediately comes to mind when you ask that question is a quote from George Bernard Shaw. He says, "The greatest illusion of effective communication is that it took place in the first place." Right?
Mm,
That I think a lot of the time people don't even stop to think or wonder, is the other party hearing me? Does the other person actually feel heard, seen in this conversation? We're
right.
so quick to go to me, 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 me,
Yeah.
right? And so often I think people just say their piece and essentially check out from the conversation at that point. And what does that do? That drives down authenticity, because when people don't feel like they're being heard, or they don't feel like they're seen in a conversation, well, they don't show up as their full selves. And that's what so often is happening. People feel like they're in these empty, performative conversations because they are.
Right.
Because neither party is really has skin in the game in the conversation, right? What do
Right.
I mean when I say skin in the game? I mean that they feel like they're invested in the outcome,
Mm,
that the end point that we're driving towards in this conversation, it requires both of us.
right.
So often people just sort of filibuster, you know,
Right. Right.
and then that's it. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's not going to be a very authentic conversation if that's the
Right.
case.
It's funny you mention that because in so much advice that you hear about people with just successful businesses, you'll hear the people who are in the upper echelon of business, they all say you have to focus on giving. You give, you give. And you mentioned something very similar in that it can't be one-sided intention with the conversation. The conversation has to be a flow that moves in both ways. Um, there's a book by Adam Grant, very popular book, Give and Take, or is it Givers
Yeah,
and
I have not
Takers?
read it. I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, and he basically, the gist of it is people that give tend to be more successful. People that give tend to be um, better received. They tend to be better leaders. People will follow them more. I was listening to an audiobook of him recently, and he was mentioning how even when it comes to finances, they tend to be better off financially, the givers, as opposed to people who are considered to be takers. So that's interesting. So in the conversations, you find also that there has to be at least some level of being aware of the other person's needs in this conversation.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I teach in sales training. There's actually a lot of data on this. This is not just my opinion or some observation. In fact, if you're familiar with um, the conversation recording tool called
No,
Gong.io, they're a
never heard
huge
of it.
company in the sales world. You can have your sales reps, all your conversations can get recorded, right?
Mm,
So what's beautiful about this in the age of big data and machine learning is you can interpolate, you can synthesize that data quite quickly. You can draw conclusions at meta levels that we've never been able to before, right? When looking at conversations. So one of the things Gong did is they looked at 26,000 sales calls. They ran them through this thing. They came up with a lot of different takeaways, but the one I think is relevant for right now is they found that literally every 10%, maybe it was 15%, that a sales rep spoke less, meaning they gave more space in the conversation for their prospect to speak, they were in a higher performance quartile. The
wow.
highest performing salespeople spoke the least, bar none. This is a
Wow.
fact. This is after looking at 26,000 sales calls, right? So,
Wow.
what does that tell us? It tells us that people are more likely to open their pockets. People are more likely to transact. People are more likely to actually say yes to what you want them to say yes to if you speak less and you actually make them feel heard.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. It's funny because there's an old saying that says God made you with two ears, two eyes, and one mouth. So you could look and listen twice as much as you speak.
Ancient wisdom.
And now we have Gong that has proven that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's ancient wisdom, and it's so true, and it's true for every aspect in life. It's not just sales calls, right? It's much more than that. If you're in any kind of romantic relationship, listen,
Yeah.
listen, shut up.
So, what are the most common mistakes that you find that people make in having conversations that either tank the conversation or make them come across as being inauthentic?
Yeah, the first and most clear one, and it's related to exactly what we're talking about, is this urge to fill silence.
Right.
I know it because I've felt it myself.
Yeah.
We all feel it, especially on a Zoom call or in person, even more so, perhaps, right? Over a coffee or something. There's this desperation to fill silence. Oh my God, we can't have silence in a conversation. There
Right.
can't be a long gap. That means that I'm not being interesting. That means that I'm not carrying the conversation. When in fact, silence is just silence. And it's often really powerful. We train salespeople
Yeah.
to use the power of silence to let their prospect think. When it comes to more broad conversations, silence is a really powerful tool because it's often the neutral territory that allows us to navigate a change in topic, a new query, a new idea. Silence can be contemplative. Silence
Mm,
can be introspective. It doesn't need to be this like, oh my God, if I'm not saying anything, that means I'm not contributing, which means I'm not interesting, which means, oh my God, they're going to walk away, right? Like, I would say the number one mistake that people make in conversations is a desire to fill silence.
wow. Bro, I love everything. I love everything about that. And it's so true. In the coaching training that I did, they dedicated a good portion of one of the lessons into silence. And this coach was saying how, just like you said, don't feel the need to say something. Sometimes people are processing what you just spoke about, what's coming up for them. He shared an example of how he was having a coaching call. At this time, he was having it via Zoom. And he was talking about how his client went silent and there was dead silence for about 5 minutes. And I don't think it was Zoom now that I think about it, because I remember he said he had to check in to see if the guy was still there. And he says there was 5 minutes of absolute silence. And he says after 5 minutes, he's like, I just had to check in and just tell him, I'm just checking in just to let you know that I'm still here. And if there's anything you need from me right now, but if you need more time, we can take the time. in the mastermind that we were in, we read the book The Prosperous Coach, which is considered to be one of the most popular, powerful, like one of the textbooks, if you will, to coaching. And one of the big lessons that Litvin, if I'm not getting the name wrong, he says is be silent, embrace silence. And it's just that. And you're absolutely right. There's something uncomfortable about being silent. And it's funny, it ties into also eye contact.
Mm.
Eye contact and silence are two very uncomfortable things. I mean, we've talked outside of here. We grew up in the hood, you know. I mean, I grew up in, South Queens, and I think, what'd you say you grew up in?
East New York, Brooklyn.
Yeah, East New York. So, prolonged eye contact, as in the primate world, is considered,
Yeah.
a threat. You have eye contact for too long, you must now either avert your gaze or provide some gesture of submission, where I think the monkeys go like.
Right. There's a clip, maybe you've seen it. There's a clip that's been going around the internet recently of a guy who's a zookeeper, and he's making eye contact with a lion.
Oh,
And after like 5 seconds, the lion's like, "What's up?"
wow.
Like, and it's all over him.
Yeah.
And it's just like, dude, what are you doing, man?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen quite a few of those nature shows, and they're very particular, especially with the primates. Like, look down, don't make eye contact, especially with the gorillas. Don't look them directly in the eye. You stare them in the eye, and it's considered to be confrontational. But I find like it's very similar in that, one of the exercises I intend to use one day when I have my my workshop all put together is to have this exercise on just eye contact, just silence and eye contact. And I've seen this done before, and the result was powerful, and I don't know if you've ever had that opportunity of just sitting in silence and just looking at someone in their eyes. And there's something there. When I saw this example done one time, there were people that began just crying, like no voice, no words, nothing was said. It was just tears started flowing. And when they explained later on, they said they felt exposed. They felt exposed, Why is that? Why do you think that we're so avert to silence? Is it just a Western thing, or you think it's a human thing?
It's a good question. I don't know if I can confidently comment outside of my life experience, and that's largely in the Western world. I would say that there's it's our insecurity. I would say it's largely driven by insecurity. There is a prevailing feeling in our culture that if you're not stepping up to fill that silence, if you're not contributing something, then you're therefore dumb or boring, or you don't have anything good to say, or whatever, right? We live in a world now where it's expected for you to share your opinion. You're
Yeah.
supposed to be on Twitter. You're supposed to be mad about something.
Right.
And I think that it creates a culture of like, I gotta share, I gotta speak, I gotta say something.
Right. That's interesting. It's funny though, that even though we try and fill the silence, conversations are intimidating. And it said that public speaking is considered to be one of the most common fears. I read something once that said the number one fear that people have is public speaking. The second is the dentist. And then the third is death, which essentially suggests that people would rather die than speak in public or go to the dentist. Would you say that conversation places in one of the higher rungs, the top fears that people have?
Maybe not all conversations, but certainly self-advocacy. I would say it's more specific than just conversations. It's self-advocacy.
Right.
People are very nervous and loath to advocate for themselves. Whether it's expressing an opinion, whether it's making a request, whether it's trying to get someone to see the world the way that you see the world, people really chafe at that. It's one of the number one, probably it's not one of, it's the number one topic that I coach around. What does it look like? It often sounds something like, I just don't feel comfortable bragging about myself. I don't feel comfortable talking about my accomplishments. I'm not an expert on this. I don't want to come across as a know-it-all, right? And it's like, yeah, of course not. No one wants to come across as a know-it-all, But there's a big distance between being a know-it-all and simply advocating for oneself and expressing an opinion on something or describing one's belief on a topic, right?
Right. Yeah. I heard someone said to me one time, they said, it's not cockiness if you can do it.
Yeah, right.
But that's interesting because despite their fears and their insecurities, they have this innate desire to do what they're setting out to do, to have that conversation, you know? And I feel like, at least from my perspective, I feel like this is where the authenticity comes in because, part of what I share and part of the message in the people that I work with is there's a part of them that is just pulling at them to move forward, And in people that feel this pull towards, I need to have this conversation or I want to get this job and communicating effectively in a way that represents me in a true, accurate fashion is something that's very important. And that's why, I reached out to you because it was like, as I'm about to embark in version 2.0 of this podcast and a slightly different approach to the coaching that we've discussed before that I do, conversations is really going to be the most important aspect in the way I serve and in the way I can help others to serve. So I felt it fitting to have you on for this, but I feel like just from what you said, authenticity, there is a very deep and relevant correlation between the quality of one's conversations and how confident one feels in their authentic self.
Absolutely. And they feed one another. It's a little self-perpetuating thing. And what do I mean by that? It comes back to the narratives that we construct. We all walk around with a million narratives bouncing around in our heads in terms of how we make sense of the world, how we make sense of other people, and what narratives and stories we tell about ourselves.
Mm,
And when we carry those narratives into conversations, they dictate how the conversations go, right? So a lot of people tell themselves a narrative, for example, I am not a good public speaker. This is a narrative that many people have constructed for themselves.
right.
Perhaps they're not,
Right.
right? But there's a difference between, yeah, one time I tried public speaking and it didn't go that well, and I am not a public speaker, right? One is an identity, another is just something that happened, right?
Yeah.
And so often people create these identities
Yep.
tied to a narrative, and then that ends up informing how they communicate and how they interface with the external world.
Right. Right. Those I am statements are extremely powerful. They're extremely powerful. With my kids, I try and teach them also the power of their words. And part of it was the I am, the other one is the I can't.
Mm-hmm.
So don't say I can't. I don't want to hear you saying I can't. I want you to hear you say, how can I? How can I? So for the person that wants to have these better conversations and your experience as a conversation coach, what would you say are like the top 3 things that you would say, that you would advise someone to have an authentic conversation?
Yeah. One is, this is the simplest one. Keep it simple.
Right.
Keep it brief. Less is more. Volunteer a small piece of yourself and let other people react. Let them ask you follow-up questions. Let them come into the conversation with you instead of upfront all the things you want to tell the world about yourself, all the opinions you have. You're about to have a conversation about Tamagotchi, and you're a really intense Tamagotchi nerd, and you have them all, and it's like, yeah, I get it. Just talk about one. Talk about your favorite Tamagotchi. Don't tell us about your whole collection. Right? It's a silly example, but you understand what I'm saying, right?
Nope, I hear
People
you.
so often we're just, I get it. You're excited. Choose one piece and start there. So that's my first tip is keep it simple.
Right.
Less is more. My second tip is ask questions. Be curious. You will learn more about yourself by learning more about others. You will learn more about what the other person needs, wants, hopes, expects, etc., by asking them questions than by talking at them. This is what one of your car salesman needed to hear
Yeah.
when you were going around to these car lots.
Mm-hmm.
These car guys, they're so excited and amped to get you into a car that what do they do when you show up? They just talk about the heated seats, and they talk about the power steering, and they talk about the torque, and they talk about all this stuff. None of that may be relevant to you. But you're just thinking about, can I fit a car seat in this back seat? Does it have the thing to open the trunk automatically? What's the MPG, right? Whatever your concerns are, right?
Right.
You're coming in with your concerns. The expert car salesman, the person who's having an authentic, effective sale, they're hanging back. They're listening. They're asking you questions. They want to know how you're going to use the car. They want to know how often you're going to drive it. They want to know the use cases for when you're going to use it.
Right.
How big is your family, etc. Right? They're going to sit back. They're going to listen. They're going to notate, and then they're going to make a competent recommendation.
Right.
And that is a perfect allegory for authentic conversations in general. Right? The next time you're interacting with somebody and you want something from them, are you just going to talk at them and tell them all the 175 ways why they should give you the thing that you want? No, it's not effective. Hang back. Shut your mouth.
Right.
Ask a few questions. Be curious. Let them volunteer information to you. There's a lovely, lovely quote. I want to make sure I attribute this to the right person. Michael Stanier. Michael Stanier is a quote from Michael Stanier. He says, "Stay curious just a little bit longer." I love it so much. Stay curious just a little bit longer. How many times have you met someone recently and you go, I don't like this person. I don't like the way that they act. I don't like the thing they're talking about. I don't like the way that they smell, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then we dismiss them. We dismiss them.
Right.
After 3 seconds, after 5 seconds, after whatever, after one thing, right?
Right.
If we just stayed curious a little bit longer, you might have learned that you have a shared interest.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times, Marco, literally thousands of times in my life, that I've met someone and I'll meet them in a group setting and a number of other people dismiss this person out of hand. I don't blame them necessarily, right? This person said something offensive. They made a tasteless joke. They put their foot in their mouth and they get dismissed. And I'll stay curious for 2 more questions, 5 more minutes. And suddenly we find out that actually we're from the same place. Our mothers know each other. We like the same television show.
Right.
We both don't like this flavor of food, whatever it is, right? There's shared human connection. We can't get there unless we listen and we stay curious a little bit longer. That's like, those are my 3 tips. Less is more.
Right.
Be curious. Stay curious a little bit longer.
So we got 3 tips. You got someone, they got them, they listen, okay, Louis is my guy. I got my 3 tips. I know what I'm going to do. They walk up to the situation they're going to be at, and all of a sudden they feel this deer in headlights thing coming on. They're about to freeze. What's your thing, your simple hack or trick to kind of get them out of that?
Oh man, Marco, this is the $1 million question, right? Because this is one of the top challenges that my clients tell me. Oh yeah, great. Listen, we practiced everything. We did all this stuff, and I just freeze up or I blank out. I go into a fugue state. A lot of people experience this, and I think the first thing is it's okay. That's the first thing I want you to know, is it's okay to freeze up for a moment.
Right.
Like we said, embrace silence. It's okay to freeze up for a second. Get it out of your head that nobody freezes and everyone else everywhere else is talking perfectly and you're the only one who's freezing. No. Freezing and pausing and feeling a little uncomfortable, it's just a natural part of the human experience and communication. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is practice. Practice. People don't practice talking.
It's funny, right? It's not considered to be something you practice at, right? You'll practice at things that are mechanically inclined. But when it comes to things that are a little bit more abstract, like the conversation, it's not something that people think that it's a thing to do.
And it's like, actually, like anything else in life, you gotta practice. What do I mean by practice? I don't mean just sit and talk to a wall, right? I mean that when you have let's call it high stakes conversation coming up. And what do I mean by high stakes? I mean any conversation that you feel invested in the outcome. That's a high stakes conversation.
Yeah.
That means that you can practice. Practice getting the words out.
Right.
What does it look like? You want to confront your roommate? What does it look like for you to actually confront them? What does it sound like? practice it. Say it out loud. Talk to a mirror. Talk to a friend. Talk to whoever will listen for a few minutes. Actually practice it. That's probably one of the most effective ways that you can tamp down on that feeling of I'm frozen. I'm a deer in headlights, because so often what's happening in that moment is you haven't been there before.
Right.
The anxiety and the tension of the moment with the novelty of the moment is overwhelming. You can diminish some of that by practicing. You can also practice with a coach, right?
Right.
That's part of what I do is I help people practice conversations all the time. We'll role play it 10 times until they feel confident, until it feels sharp. And then they go out into the world and come on, of course you're going to feel differently going into that conversation to ask for a raise, to confront your roommate, to break up with someone. I had a couple of breakup conversations I've helped with recently. They, if you've done it already, the words have left your mouth at some point, you're going to feel a lot more confident in that moment.
And it seems to me that the practice does not necessarily have to be something identical to what you're planning on speaking about. It seems like the practice is more so in just becoming comfortable with sharing what's inside and bringing it out and allowing that back and forth. Would you agree?
Yes, I would totally agree. And to put it to one word, it's vulnerability.
Mm,
That's what you're describing.
right.
That feeling that people get when they're frozen in place and it's like, oh my God, I can't get a word out right now. It's because now they're like, wait a second, I got to be vulnerable. And that can be like a splash of cold water, right? And then
Yeah.
you freeze. If you've practiced opening yourself up and being vulnerable a little bit, even if it's just in a role play practice environment, when it comes to the real thing, you're going to feel more confident and
Right.
you're going to be able to be vulnerable in a way that feels authentic and accessible.
I think in the right dose and the right way, it's something that actually attracts people to you because you're human, Um,
Yes.
and I find it's more so with the alphas. People that are considered to be alphas, when they kind of bring themselves down to a more sensitive human level, I feel that makes them more people gravitate to them.
Absolutely. And what you're describing in another word is authenticity.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is at the heart of authenticity because it requires offering oneself up in a real and exposed way for us to connect. That's why we love certain musicians,
Mm,
right? Because they exude a certain vulnerability in their lyrics, in their persona, in their music. What do we call that? We call that like raw music,
right.
right? When we listen to the music and we can hear the heartbreak in the singer's voice, that is vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that is a form of authenticity.
Are there any conversations that stand out to you, like that you would consider, man, this is one of the best conversations I ever had, or even on the other end of the spectrum, and like this was one of the worst conversations I ever had?
I mean, certainly, of course, I'm a human being like everyone else. And my mind, when you ask me that, goes to all the failed job interviews I've ever been in.
Hmm.
Right? All the times I went into a room and trying to sell myself, advocate for myself, and nobody was buying.
Pimping ain't
I
easy,
think,
man. Pimping ain't
yeah,
easy.
right. I think man, you really want to go rough conversations. I consider any live performance, any comedy I've ever done as a type of conversation.
Hmm.
It's a conversation with the audience.
Right.
And I've performed in rooms with there's two people in the crowd.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
did a show at Broadway Comedy Club. It's in Manhattan, old school venue. I think there might have been, yeah, two people in the audience. I'm on stage. They introduce me. There's some
Yeah.
lights, whatever. Two people in the audience, right? That was rough. I
Right.
remember feeling like, oh man. But then I just played to those two people. I
Right.
had fun with it. But I remember thinking like, wow, this is tough. There are very few people in this audience, and it's just going to be really intense. And I feel like I'm under a microscope. That feeling of deer in headlights definitely came up.
Right.
What did I do? I just became vulnerable,
Right.
and it unlocked so much in that moment. In
Right.
terms of powerful conversations, I'm very grateful and fortunate to have them every single day. It's what I do for a living.
Right.
I had an incredibly powerful conversation earlier today, just a few hours ago, with one of my clients who is trying to figure out what the next stage is in her career, trying to figure out, does she want to be the person her parents and her family and her community want her to be, or does she want to be someone else?
Right.
And so we've been digging through that and really getting into a lot of issues around vulnerability, around authenticity.
Mm.
Super, super relevant to this conversation today. And I love it. I love when my clients show up and they're their full selves and they're candid with me and they're vulnerable with me, because that's when the best work gets done.
Right.
That's when we really get down to like, okay, what's actually going on here? Because even in moments where they're meeting with a coach or meeting with a therapist, what do people do? They continue these narratives just because you're alone. I mean, people will continue telling themselves a narrative when they're alone.
Right.
It's just them. There's no one else even listening.
Right.
And they're still spewing nonsense or convincing themselves of something else, some ulterior reality, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. So if someone is in one of these situations where like this conversation is going down it's spiraling, down the toilet, is there anything that you find that will salvage it? I guess more so for the person that kind of is leading the conversation or that initiated the conversation. Is there anything you find that can salvage a conversation?
Yeah, 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 all the time. I love the power of the intense, intentional check in
Mm.
where hey, listen, I don't get the sense that this conversation is going the way that either of us expected.
Right.
Very, very powerful. The tone, your tone and your delivery really matters here.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you how many sales I have made over the years where the first 20 minutes, wow, this person's not buying. It's not going well. They're asking lots of questions. They're poking holes. It's not good. And I'll actually just say, hey, listen, I don't get the sense that we're on the same page here.
Mm.
And then we come back to their first principles, right? What exactly you told me you wanted to accomplish XYZ,
Right.
right? Having that reset, it can be uncomfortable, that pivot moment,
Yeah.
but it's so effective. And what does it require? It requires a little bit of authenticity. It requires a little bit of vulnerability. It requires us to say, hey, hold on. Let's not continue along this performative track where we're both going to smile and nod and both go away unhappy. Let's actually acknowledge that this conversation is not going in the direction that either of us intended. And let's pause right here. Do you want to continue? Okay, you want to continue the conversation. So tell me, where am I missing you? How am I misunderstanding you? It's so powerful to give somebody that space
Right.
and signal to them that you're actually trying to hear them and not just interested in what you want to say.
So keep it simple. Be curious. Stay curious. Embrace silence. Don't fear it. And above all, be authentic. Be yourself. And be open to the possibility that your authentic self may not always blend with the person you're trying to converse with. You're not going to win them all, just like you're not going to win every sales conversation in meeting new people. You're not always going to, jive. You're not always going to connect with that person. Be open to that possibility that agree to disagree and walk different ways.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the keys to authenticity is it's not being authentic doesn't mean that I am being vulnerable and being myself only when it's convenient or only when it's going to work out well for me or only when there's money at the end of it, right?
Right.
It means that I'm just being myself because that's who I am. I am what I am, right?
Yeah.
That's what Popeye taught us.
Yeah.
That and to eat spinach.
Yeah.
And it really is like it's so true. It's so basic. It's so simple, but it really is one of those true things in life. Like being yourself is so much more freeing and so much less stress once you actually inhabit your body and inhabit your personhood in a real way.
Yeah.
It's so much less stressful.
Yeah. So we've been talking back and forth a lot about authenticity. And I just want to get your take on it. So what is authenticity to you?
Authenticity is showing up in a way that feels true and is in some way at least slightly vulnerable. Vulnerability is the key to authenticity. I know this to be the case.
Mm.
It's so self-evident, right?
Right.
Because if you're really into something and that's authentically you and you bring it up, you're not bringing it up with the expectation that the listener, your audience, is also into that thing,
Right.
also shares that interest. You're just bringing it up because it's what you're into,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's really, really powerful, and not doing so much window dressing and table setting. People love to, well, this is my thing and I know it's weird and I know it's da da da. We,
Yeah.
we, we give all these caveats, right?
Ah, that's big. Yes. Yes. And that's a very common thing in the insecure. They preface it. They preface it.
Yes.
And you can, this goes back to what we were talking about in terms of the prep work, and then you get in the situation, just like all of the confidence, like instantaneously fizzles. You're like, oh crap, I got to salvage. You're like, I know this is going to sound dumb, but I'm just thinking out loud here, but and then they kind of like, oh, table setting. I like the way you said
Right?
that. Of course,
The
Louis.
negative caveats. It's
Yes.
awful. Think about powerful, effective speakers that you can think of in your life, whether it's a parent, whether it's a politician. Right? I think of Barack Obama. The guy's an incredible speaker.
Yeah.
He's so good. And do you think he's ever prefacing what he's saying with like, I know this might sound stupid, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's funny because I was thinking about that because I catch myself in the same situation sometimes as well. And I've become very observant to these people who are considered to be masters in their field, or people who are very high up and highly respected. And they just speak. Like Oprah. She doesn't preface anything. She just speaks. And I've been watching some videos and stuff because I'm trying to learn her presence and just people in general. But I was watching some videos and she just walks in and she's just there. She's just, I'm just me. And people are like, oh my God, Oprah, it's so nice to meet you. She's like, yeah, yeah,
Oprah is a perfect example.
yeah. If you could go back in time and talk to your 14-year-old self, what would you tell 14-year-old Louis?
Oh, man. What would I tell 14-year-old Lewis? Buy Bitcoin. There's going to be this thing called NFTs coming out soon, and I don't know. Just get some money into it early, okay? And then get out. Seriously, what would I tell 14-year-old me? Honestly,
Yeah,
this is going to sound kind of funny coming from me, but I would say get started even earlier.
mm,
Get out on stage even earlier. Get yourself out there. Make even more mistakes earlier.
right,
Because every single time I've fallen on my face, and I have fallen on my face many times, I have been fired from jobs. I have been performed to empty rooms. I've performed to full rooms and no one laughs. You can
right,
hear a pin drop, just as painful as an empty room,
right,
if not more. Um, and I've learned so much, and it's not more than just I've learned. I can literally trace the growth, my personal growth,
right,
at each of these junctures. Every time I failed, I've been able to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, interesting. Take note of that. Not going to try
right,
that one again.
right,
Right. And I guess, yeah, my advice to my 14-year-old self is just like, get out there, move fast, make mistakes, make as many mistakes as you can, man. Just try stuff. Just keep throwing stuff at the wall. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Our topic today has been conversations. And for the person who feels that they're called to either have better conversations or to help other people have better conversations, what advice would you give them to take the first steps into following through with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, I'll take it in two parts. One, if you're somebody who's thinking about getting into coaching, or you want to help other people in some way, specifically around conversations, the best advice I can give you is just get in there. Just start scheduling these. People will want to chat with you. Go find a Facebook group. Go find people on Craigslist. There's a whole lot of people, especially coming out of the last 2 years. People want to talk. There are people out there that will chew your ear off, no problem.
I can see that.
So if you're actually serious, or you want to start interrogating or investigating this and you want to pursue it, just put yourself out there. Hang a little sign up saying you're willing to listen, and people will be willing to talk. So that's my first advice for anybody looking to get into this. If you're just looking to improve yourself, my advice is similar but different. Get into the habit of practicing, whether it's with a coach, whether it's with a book, whether it's with your mirror. Be intentional and carve out space. Maybe it's 30 minutes a week.
Right.
That's
Right.
it. 30 minutes a week.
Right.
Everyone has that.
Right.
I don't want to hear that you don't have that. You have that available to yourself, right?
Right.
So maybe it's you read a book, phenomenal book. I have one book recommendation to this whole thing: Crucial Conversations.
Mm.
It has like 4 or 5 authors. I don't know all their names, but Crucial Conversations is the Bible, I think, of effective communication. I work with that book with many, many of my clients. I've read it at least half a dozen times.
Wow.
I think it's such a pivotal, useful, easy read. Introduces some really great concepts in it.
So for people that are interested in working with you or following what you're doing, how do they reach out to you?
Love that question. You can find me at havebetterconversations.com. So easy. Go there. You can book time with me there. You can email me there. Havebetterconversations.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, what have you. But really, find my website. It's so straightforward, and you'll have all the information you need there.
Awesome. Louis, thanks so much for being on, brother. It's always nice speaking with you, man. We have a lot of laughs off the Zoom. I'm sure that everyone that watched this is going to now approach conversation in a different light. I definitely learned something new. Thank you for your time and sharing all of your expertise, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marco. The pleasure is all mine. I'm excited to listen to this and listen to all the new episodes that are coming out. This new 2.0 of the podcast. It's really exciting, and thank you for creating this space.
And that's our first episode of Season 2, version 2.0 of the Business of Being You podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and now feel more confident in having authentic conversations. My name is Marco Benitez, also known as Coach MarcoB, and I'm a life and small business coach specializing in authenticity. I help people and businesses to be authentic confidently so that they can eliminate stress, achieve higher goals, and serve people better. If you want some free resources or coaching around authenticity, just visit me at coachmarcob.com, and that's B like boy. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Coach MarcoB. Thank you for joining me, and remember to mind your business, the business of being you.